So friends with Rick Santorum, we were in D.C. after kind of during National Prayer Breakfast. And so he and I were at lunch together and we were talking about this. And I said, I spent 12 years in full-time ministry. I spent 12 years in full-time business. He just kind of out of the blue, he's like, have you ever thought about running for ag commissioner? And I said, okay, why would you say that? And he said, you cleaned up honey. No one was testing honey. He said, right now, people don't trust food. And so you created trust by transparency and testing, and people feel like they're getting sick. We need someone that would go and focus on cleaning up food. And you've got that ag background. So I went home and I was telling my wife about this, and Patty, she said, man, I can really see that, which shocked me.
Ready to roll?
Yep.
All right.
Real Texan.
Why should this matter to real Texans?
Well, thank you for joining us on this episode of Real Texans. Today, we are speaking with a veteran and entrepreneur and now a candidate for Agriculture Commissioner here in Texas, Nate Sheets. Nate, thank you so much for joining.
Brandon, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
We'll talk about your run for Agriculture Commissioner, but I want to focus on your background. You built Nature Nate's Honey, if people have heard of that, into a leading brand. How did you even get started in that field?
Who would ever think that my whole life would be provided for by insects? But met my wife at church back in 1995. And right after we got married, Patty said, we need a hobby together. I think she was thinking gardening, antiques, something like that. But I had always loved honey. And they had this TV commercial that showed this lady in a bee suit covered up with bees back in 1996, promoting what the internet was for. And it said, you can find anything on the internet. So I went over, typed in Beekeeping Dallas, and that pulled this honey company. So I called this guy and asked him if I could buy a beehive. He said, sure. And so we lived in an apartment in Plano, Texas. And so I had to call my parents and ask them if I could put a beehive in their backyard because I just bought this one hive. And so that's really how I got into it. It's, started as a hobby and Fred had, about 100 hives. So I'd go and work the bees with him on the weekends. And he was 75 years old and had cancer, had a hard time getting around. So I started getting up 4 o'clock in the morning, putting honey on the store shelves using about 10 local stores and just helping them. And then Patty and I would go down to his house at night. She was a school teacher, and we'd bottle honey by hand in his garage, and bottle it by hand, put on the cap, put on label, and then I'd go deliver at 4 o'clock the next morning. So that's kind of where the genesis of the whole thing. I wound up, buying it from Fred in the summer of 1997 for $10,000 on terms, and then, but that same year, I wound up going on a mission trip. And then wound up that turning into me going into full-time vocational ministry, raise support like a missionary at the end of 97. So I had, the honey company on the side the whole time I was on staff at E3. So
So when did or did it ever shift to your full-time focus?
Yeah. So I was at E3 from 1997 till 2010 and did some amazing things there. E3 was a church planting ministry. And so I worked in about 88 countries around the world, a lot in Africa, Sudan and Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda. And then in 2010, I left and started focusing on the honey company full time, and it was very small. And candidly, we were just asking the Lord, is this what you want us to do full time? And so we asked God to give us $100,000 more a year in revenue. We were going to take the next 2 weeks and pray about it. And so Patty and I were actually on the front porch and we were reading in Psalm 80, and the last verse of Psalm 80 says, and I will feed you with the finest of wheat and honey from this rock.
Well, that's a sign. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And so about a week later, I went by this Walmart and at Patty's encouragement, and long story short, we were praying for $100,000 more for the year. We got our very first purchase order from Walmart about a month and a half later for $107,000 exactly. Everything we were asking God for in a year, he did in one order with an exclamation point of number 7.
What were the biggest challenges of scaling that business then?
So I had a co-packer, and so I didn't have any of the manufacturing myself. And so I had another beekeeper that bottled my honey. And so early on, scaling wasn't the issue. And so, I went into Walmart and I got into 121 Walmarts locally. I reset those myself. Me and another guy started got into Costco after they told me, no, you can't come into Costco because we're a single SKU company. On Wednesday nights, we'd drop our kids off at Awana at church, and Patty and I would go over to Costco. And I was texting the buyer standing in front of the coffee section. And I said, hey, you've thought about honey the wrong way. You've got 5 different kinds of coffee. just think about honey differently. And the next week I was in another section. Next week I was in another section. And eventually he said, fine, you can come in, we'll put you in 9 clubs. And so, early on, I just spent all of my time of just guerrilla marketing. I didn't have any idea about the grocery industry. I've been in full-time ministry and, advertising and other entrepreneurship ventures, but knew nothing about grocery. But literally just guerrillaed it and got and started shoving honey into every nook and cranny I could in Dallas-Fort Worth.
How has being a business founder, particularly in your line of work there, shaped your philosophy about regulation, government, consumer protection, agriculture policy?
Yeah, I'm a free market guy. I think that the government is not there to regulate. They're there to help create an environment where people can be successful. And I saw that even in the honey industry. So I paid the farmers a premium for their honey if they would sell me good, clean honey. Now, how did I know that? Because I tested 100% of everything that I bought twice. I'd test it before I bought it, and then I'd test it after I bought it, and test for herbicides, fungicides, pesticides, antibiotics. And so beekeepers, all of a sudden, at first they were annoyed because no one else tested for honey at that time. But they knew, well, Nathan will pay a premium over everybody else. So I'm going to start being thoughtful about where I'm going to put my bees. And so all of a sudden, these guys were selling me good, clean honey that I spent $1 million a year testing honey. And then I got a 30% premium at the shelf because consumers showed that they're willing to pay, for food that they felt like was safe and clean. And so for me, that's kind of this principle by how which you approach the market. Consumers vote with their dollars. Sure. And that dictates what food companies or producers are going to produce based on what people are willing to buy. And so I think the issues that we have in Texas and even in the United States right now of, food companies that are producing things that are harmful, to our health. And so there's got to be this fine balance of, regulation of companies not just being motivated by profit, but also by product, what it is. And yet we see with RFK and Donald Trump, it takes just a little bit of pressure for these food companies to go, okay, we'll get rid of the red dye and we'll get rid of this and we'll actually give you guys the same recipes that we've been giving to Europe for the past 20 years. And we won't give you the things that we are. So why did food companies do that? Because their goal is to create shareholder value, and how they do that? By selling food.
Now, you've already talked about faith a few times already in this interview, and you talked about it on your campaign. Let me ask, have there been any moments in business where that's been tested?
What part of it?
Where those values essentially have been tested in
business. I think when we would have honey that would come back with pesticides in it, there is your ability to take it and go blend it in and lessen it. Nothing unethical, nothing illegal, but it was unethical because that's not the standard that we had. Yeah. And so we made financial decisions that maybe weren't the best for us, as a company, but as a small brand, we were so committed to the purity and we actually had the purity guarantee that we created, because we weren't going to compromise in how we approached the brand. And so the brand for us was the sacred part of the company. And if it takes a lifetime, you've heard this. I mean, I tell this to my kids, it takes a lifetime to build trust and seconds to lose it. And so we had to operate in a manner that we could never put that part of the company at risk.
Tell me about your time in the Navy Reserves. You spent 6 years there?
Yeah. Yes, actually here in Austin at Camp Mabry. I always say we're on the USS Sofa. No, but my dad was an Air Force colonel. And so in our family, the girls got to go to college wherever they wanted to, but the boys, how are you going to pay for your school, Nathan? And so my brother went Air Force Reserves, but I loved to fish, and so I went into the Navy. And so I joined the Navy, and I was very proud to do it. It's in the reserve program in the Navy specifically, when you would go do your 2 weeks active duty, they're not going to send you out to a ship that's underway because it's, it's out in the
Yeah.
Pacific Ocean.
Yeah.
And so I spent a lot of time in a Navy shipyard up in Pennsylvania with a paint gun, cleaning or, taking paint off the wall. But, it is one of those things. I'm very proud to do it and had done it. I know so many guys today, we have these, a whole sector of guys that were in Iraq and Afghanistan. But the majority of people I know, never really served. And so I view, what I did in the military and even what I did in ministry is kind of the same. One was serving our country and the other serving the kingdom. And those two things really did culminate together in how I even approached Nature Nates and wanting to make an impact for God's kingdom by business.
And you've since transitioned out of leadership or active management at Nature Nates. You sold the company a few years ago, right?
Yeah, sold at the end of 21, and I was a CEO until November of 24, and I've been on the board. But
Okay.
And then when I decided, hey, this is what I feel like is the next phase of life, I had to resign off the board even.
Was that a hard trade-off to make?
It took a big financial whack at me, personally, because I was compensated for being there on the board.
Sure.
And so I had to walk away from that. It's hard walking away and not having any involvement with the honey company.
Mhm.
Like I'm just now, a shareholder.
Right.
And so that part's really kind of odd, but it's funny. When I was on staff at E3 Partners, we did I Am Second. And so, I felt like I kind of got wrapped up in being the I Am Second guy at E3. And so when I left, there was a period of time where I was like, all right, I'm not that, but it still felt like that represented a lot of who I was. And I think that was a really good time in my life for God to kind of work that stuff out of me.
Mhm.
And then when I started doing Nature Nates and I created that, I didn't get caught up of feeling like I am Nature Nate. I'm Nathan Sheets and the brand is Nature Nate. And so I would, Nathan Sheets, the marketer or sales guy, was helping to, go push these products. And so I could have two hats. That's kind of how I view, coming into politics. This isn't something that I need to do. I need to find my identity, in this. And candidly, I'm doing it as an act of service because I want to go make a difference in the lives of Texans and Americans, because there's a huge opportunity and a huge need at the same time.
How did you get into what did drive you into this race for agriculture commissioner? You haven't held any public office before, right?
I've never wanted to.
Yeah.
I've always been kind of, a donor. So friends with Rick Santorum, and I've talked with Rick over the years just about, politics and things like that, because obviously he was involved. And so when I left in November, we were in D.C. after kind of during National Prayer Breakfast. And so he and I were at lunch together and we were talking about this. And I said, I spent 12 years in full-time ministry. I spent 12 years in full-time business. And now I'm kind of at this next phase of like, okay, Lord, what do you want next? And, he just kind of out of the blue, he's like, have you ever thought about running for ag commissioner? And I wanted to ask him, you meant governor, right? It's like, and he said, and I said, okay, why would you say that? And he said, you cleaned up honey. No one was testing honey. He said, right now, people don't trust food. And so you created trust by transparency and testing, and people feel like they're getting sick. We need someone that would go and focus on cleaning up food. And you've got that ag background. And so I was like, well, okay, I'll think about that. I appreciate that. So I went home and I was telling my wife about this, and I pulled up the ag commissioner's job description, and I was actually quite shocked what the job description entailed, because what I had seen and what that were two different things. And when I read that to Patty, she said, man, I could really see that, which shocked me. And so she said, a lot of those things you've been trying to accomplish even at Nature Nates. And so like better for you products, our mission statement was to honor God and help you and your family live healthy lives, and felt like processed sugars, were killing Americans. And so we tried to re-engineer products that historically was made with corn syrup with honey, which is your body completely processes differently. I used the honey company. I went down into Bonton, which is a part of Dallas, and a good friend of mine started Bonton Farms. And I was in the back of a room in a Bible study and listening to people. I felt like the Lord, prompted me to follow up Darren the next day and ask him, hey, you think any of these guys guys want to get in the honey business? And so we started with 7 guys. I said, you guys put 2 years into it and I'll give you the honey company. And the goal wasn't to try to make them beekeepers. The goal was to give them a vision for their own life. And so we started with these 7 guys. We got 38 beehives. We got them in bee suits. We trained them. And it was amazing. And one guy left and he became a barber. Another guy left and started an automotive business. Another guy left and started a landscaping company. But the goal of that was to help them see a vision for their life. And part of an even ag commissioner role, is a rural economic development of, how do you go into poorer, more challenged parts of Texas and use agriculture as a economic tool to help lift people up and give them a vision and passion for their own life. So a lot of the things that we saw in that job description and a lot of things that I have worked on in the past were very similar. And that's what Patty meant when she said, you've been doing a lot of this through Nature Nates. Now you should maybe go do it through something else.
You certainly emphasized a lot over cleaner food, for example, and the MAHA movement is certainly at full force right now. We even saw earlier this year during the legislative session that when there was the Make Texas Healthy Again legislation, you saw massive pushback from lobbyists for a lot of these, big corporations coming in and trying to push back against that. How do you fight back against that if you're the agriculture commissioner?
The one thing that I recognize that when we were in ministry, we were limited by the dollars we could raise from donors. When I was in business, I was limited by the dollars I could make. But when I think of it being ag commissioner, it's the bully pulpit that you have, the ability to, bring people to the table and take on big opportunities or take on big problems and challenges and use that as a way to, bring different sides of the table, together, because even though one guy believes one thing and another one believes something else, the outcome is going to be a better decision because you have both perspectives going into it. And so I think, do I have the ability to go in and, ban certain things or regulate certain things? No, but I will have the ability to go in and be a voice and to try to challenge and encourage and sponsor and drive, things that do 2 things: help create a cleaner, better, safer, more healthy, nutritious food, and help farmers and ranchers be more successful than they ever have been. And that's, those 2 things are not exclusive from each other. Like I said earlier, when farmers and ranchers have direct access to consumers, then consumers are going to vote with their dollars, and they're going to be able to see when I can produce healthy, nutritious food, people are going to pay for it. But the challenge that we have today is they don't have access to consumers. In 1980, farmers got 40 cents of every $1 of food that went in people's mouths. Today, it's 15 cents, 60% less revenue than there was 45 years ago. So that's the reason why we lose 68 farming families a week and have since 2018. In the United States, we lost 123,000 farmers last year, 7%. So we're losing the small farmers, and those small farmers are the entrepreneurial vigor and blood of small towns. And they're also the small farmers of today that become the big farmers of tomorrow. I mean, they're the Nathan Sheets that become, Nature Nates. And so we need more people to get into agriculture, and we need to help create a economic environment where they can thrive, not just survive.
One issue that has gotten a lot of attention, especially over the last few months, has been regulation of THC products. You've certainly seen this debate, and the current agriculture commissioner has weighed in. Still sort of unresolved. Where do you fall on that fight over whether or not these products should be allowed or they should be regulated or what?
Yeah. I do believe that part of the responsibility of where we are today and lack of confusion was not a well thought out program when we brought hemp in. And I don't think that the Ag Commission, specifically under the current commissioner's leadership, did a good job really thinking through all the different facets. And so, it's kind of like with my kids. We talk about alcohol and, drinking and things like that. I just sent a kid off to college at Ole Miss, and I'm like, now listen, dude, I said, if you choose not to drink, you'll never look back in your lifetime and think, man, I wish I drank more.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah.
And so when I think about, marijuana, I know that there are medicinal purposes and people who, want to use it for PTSD and pain relief and things like that. But, um, you know, I don't believe that that's the majority of use. I think it's recreational. And so my personal preference is I don't think it has any great benefit, to helping a society be better, and I think of Charlie Kirk and how he was just inspiring kids to, man, go make a difference. And he even said, I don't drink. Donald Trump doesn't drink, Tucker Carlson doesn't drink. So don't drink, go make a difference, be the best person you can. So, I mean, whether it's alcohol or whether it's, marijuana, go be the best person you can. And I promise you, if you don't do either one of those things, you won't look back and wish you had done it more.
You're running against an incumbent Agriculture Commissioner, Sid Miller, who's been in office for the last 13 years, I guess, or 12 years now. What areas of improvement do you think you could bring to the office?
I know how to drive growth. I've started probably 20 different companies. Some of them have failed. Some of them have been successful. And so, being an entrepreneur, I see opportunities and I see challenges, and I know how to rally troops together. I know how to cast vision, get people excited, get them to the table, and work on actually, taking advantage of things. I don't believe that where we stand today, that we have that type of leadership. And so I will be focused on that aspect. There's a lot of ethical distractions that are unnecessary to the department and that have mired the department, with a lot of internal challenges and disruption. Those things shouldn't be there. And even hemp, has created challenges at the TDA, at the very top of the leadership. And so that would be something that would be very different if I was blessed to be there.
Yeah. If you could accomplish just one thing as Agriculture Commissioner, what would it be?
I don't see a separation between growing food better and growing better food. And that to me is the producer side and the consumer side. And so to create if the only one thing I created was an ability to farmers and ranchers to be able to go out and get back to a 40 cents of every $1 of food. And that's driven by them having access to consumers, and consumers are doing that because they're producing clean, nutritious, and healthy food. Then, man, we have won for generations to come.
Last question. How can folks who want to follow your campaign do that? Where can they follow you?
Yeah. NateSheets.com. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
Nate Sheets, like bedsheets.com. And then you can go to Nate Sheets for Texas and X and Twitter, or X and Facebook and Instagram. But NateSheets.com is the best way to be able to follow us. And we've got a lot of events that we're doing all over the state. We're speaking about 38 different True Texas Project town halls. And so we'd love for your listeners to come out and I'd love to meet them and hear what they feel are the greatest needs for both Texas and farming families.
Nate Sheets, thank you so much for sitting down with us, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Real Texans.